So today, Kate and I are really excited to have a guest on, Jessica Hazelbaker. So I'll kind of let Kate explain, the thought process behind having Jessica on, and I'm really excited to just dive into some stuff. If you guys listen to this podcast regularly, we talk a lot about like mind, body health and things like that. And we're going to dive more into that. And we have a guest that's going to help us do that. And Kate, we talked a little bit about it the other day, just like really why we wanted to have Jessica on. So,
well, a lot of my journey with Jessica, I feel like anything I do with my clients, I'm the guinea pig first. And I've always been into different modalities of healing, mentally, physically. And I started seeing Jessica. I was trying to remember how that came about. Did I send one of the kids to you first? And you're like, well, thanks. I don't normally work with kids.
That's right. Yeah, I think I saw maybe Charlotte first.
Okay. It was for some craniosacral work. Was that right? Or
that I think that may have been what we started with.
Yeah, and she was pretty young. And then you told me you usually work with adults, craniosacral work. And so I started seeing Jessica, and what I noticed with me personally was a lot of my physical ailments were really not rooted in what I had done physically. They were emotional. They had an emotional root. So, really basically from the time I was in my late 20s to, I'm starting to work through some of this now, but I just felt really tired, worn down, beat up all the time. And I thought, well, okay, it's years of, running half marathons and bodybuilding shows, and that all affected me. But what I started to really discover, I think, with Jessica more than anyone else, was that this was more rooted in unresolved emotional baggage, and that my body was starting to heal and feel younger as I was offloading this with the help of her. So now I translated that to my clients, like I try to always do and evolve my practice, where when I'm working with someone, we always start with like the physical, hey, how are you eating? How are you working out? What are your habits? And I really take inventory of that. But when the client is either having trouble making consistent changes that stick, or their body seems like it's not cooperating with them, and that can be even just holding on to weight. I've had clients that it just seems like their body's stubborn and holding on, or it's not healing. They've had the same injury for a long time. I like to say, hey, we're going to divert tracks here a little bit. I want you to put more of your focus on internal healing, because there's something else going on. There's another factor here. And I've done this for enough years. Every person's a little different. Their body reacts a little different, but you should see change at a certain cadence. Okay. It's almost like when we're working out, we've worked out for so long, if someone's cutting reps, because you know how long it takes to cycle butterfly pull-ups or kipping pull-ups, or, you can be better on the bike or this, but what's kind of physically possible. And I feel like the same in the same regard in what I do with bodies and working with bodies and transformation, you should see change at somewhat of
there's a range.
Yes. The guardrails are a range of you should be changing. So either you're not doing what you're putting down, whether it's workouts or food or that sort of thing, or there's another factor. And so I've instead of diving into everyone's lying to me, which, there's some of that where people might just not be honest, but there's other factors that are going on. And so it's been really neat to have, I've probably send 60% of my clients to Jessica at some point. It's been really neat to see some clients, even ones where their body just kind of wouldn't budge. And I'm like, well, I feel like you're not going to shed this extra body fat or weight until you can shed emotionally what you need to. And then they start to change. And it's just like their body's holding on to this as protection. So that's my reasoning for sending my clients to her. And I think it can literally apply to anyone. Brandon's seen her. My mother's seen her. My mother-in-law is going to see her now. My children have seen her. And, it's really unique what you do. And I would like you to kind of dive into that, what it is exactly that you do, and maybe how you vary it or tailor it to each person. Because I know every one of my sessions, I mean, it's kind of fun. I never know what we're going to get into. I know you don't either. Like, okay, what's going to come up today? And it's a little bit of an adventure. And sometimes I'm like, I just don't want to cry today. And those are always the days I'm like bawling, blowing snot. But I'll let you kind of go.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. So I do several different things. I kind of got into the work doing craniosacral therapy, and then the state of Ohio changed their laws, and so I had to go to massage school to get a license in order to touch bodies. And through the process of trying to figure out which direction did I want to go in, I started working with a shaman for my own personal work. And in that process, she was like, you're already tapping into something that I feel like the average person could really benefit from. I think you need to develop that and figure out what that is. And so I started kind of researching what is it that I'm doing. And I came across the term intuitive healing. And that really resonated for me. It really felt like, okay, this encompasses kind of what I'm doing. There's an energetic component, but a lot of it also is relying on my intuition to feel into what's happening in the person's body, and identify maybe some things that they're not even necessarily conscious of. And I also felt like I wanted to have something that was different, because craniosacral therapy is such a physical body work. It's very gentle, but it's a hands-on body work, and it's working with the tissue, with the fascia, and it's got a lot of science behind it. And intuitive healing kind of is a little bit more out there for some people. And so I felt like I needed to have something that described what that was, so that I wasn't just telling people I'm doing craniosacral therapy and then they're having this experience and they're going, well, but that's not what the average craniosacral therapist does. So I was trying to kind of keep them separate. Now I kind of incorporate a little bit of it in a lot of my sessions, because just doing the body work doesn't always get at what we're trying to get into. So those sessions do look different from time to time. I might have somebody on the table who talks through the whole session, and it feels very much like a therapy session. That's not what I do, right? I'm not a counselor, but that's how they process. They're verbal processors, and that works. They still have tissue change, and they still have emotional release, and they have energetic change that happens in their body. Sometimes there's no talking whatsoever, and it's literally just me feeling what's happening in the tissue, what changes are being made. And oftentimes it's a sense that I get in my own body of, okay, there's an emotional piece here. I get lots of messages, so I may have, for example, I may have somebody who's on the table. In fact, I had one of my very first intuitive healing clients was in Spain. And I was working on her from a distance, and I got this really strong sense that she had something going on in her right shoulder. And so at the end, when I was debriefing with her, and I told her, I said, I feel like there's something happening in your right shoulder. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a past injury. I don't know if there's something that's stored there. She kind of was like, I don't know what that is. I'm not sure. And then she went to the beach later that day, and her shoulder actually popped back into place. So something was dislocated. So I just had this sense of there's something going on there that I needed to tell her so that she could be aware and do whatever in order to release it or fix it or tap into later on. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
From a user standpoint, like, again, everything you do is really unique. So when I've gone to you, and just for people who are listening, who are like not, this is like something that's way off of like their radar. Mm-hmm. I'll go in and my wires will feel really crossed. Like my nervous system's out of whack. Maybe I'll be having trouble sleeping. Maybe aches and pains. Just like my wires are really crossed. And I'll get on the table. We'll kind of go through the whole thing. And when I come out of it, if I could describe it any way, it'd be like, your old desktop computer, like it's just not working or like things are flashing, you like reset it. And I like kind of almost like wake up out of it. And my nervous system is completely reset and tamped down. And I'm like, wow, like I was I'm really relaxed. And I was, whereas like maybe when I was going into it, I was pissed off or even whatever I was thinking about, it's totally reset. Mm-hmm. And I feel like now I'm in a spot where I can start to heal whatever it was, whether it was mental, physical, or anything. Now I'm in a place where my body can reset and start to heal, where it was just off, like the electrical currents or what was all just frazzled and off. And if you ever feel like you're walking around like with a lot of anxiety and then it just boom resets it. So I don't know. That's my way of describing it.
I think that's a good point. Is at least picking up on something that you said, and this is kind of building off of what you were talking about. Like consciously, we're not always aware of like exactly what's going on in our bodies, and mm-hmm. I will, like what you were saying, Brandon. You'll focus whatever you're pissed off about or just kind of bothering you at the time isn't usually the issue. And like our last session, I got in and I was just bitching for 20 minutes. And I'm like, I don't even want to see her because I'm just like, just raging about everything and everyone. And I'm like, okay, I know that's not why I'm here. Let's get to some work. This is about me, or I want to be this like fired up. And it just changes your focus. It helps you drop into your and that's what one of the biggest values I find for me personally is it helps me tap into my subconscious that I have a really hard time doing. Even when I meditate, I might kind of go into a dreamlike state, but I won't come to these answers. And I'm more of a verbal processor. I think Brandon's more like in his body when he's there.
I don't talk.
But it helps me kind of, it's almost like I'm following like a maze in my mind. And you'll ask me a question, and then it for some reason, being there in that space, and I think as part of the craniosacral and the energy work, I can almost have the answer come to me like it's not me answering. So I'm not trying to find the answer within my mind. It just pops up, almost like you'll say, the person with the shoulder, it came to you. Yep. Those answers will come to me. So it's been very, very neat where I've gone back through early childhood memories that I don't consciously remember, that it's the root of a certain pain or a feeling, and it's been really, really helpful. So I know you don't advertise, but it's totally my therapy. And I find that really, really valuable and extremely interesting. And I know you've done this work yourself personally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just find it's so difficult. I know I'm really selling it. But for at least like what I think I want out of it, and maybe this is part of my personality, but I find it really hard, but I find it very, it's like a good workout. It's very, very valuable. And if I didn't have to kind of get to that point myself, I don't think I would have the same release.
Yeah. Well, and I think a couple of things. I think Brandon made a really great point here. Your central nervous system is a major factor in here. And so oftentimes I'll tell clients when they first come in, their very first session is, if you get nothing out of this other than you feel calmer, more relaxed at the end, then I've done my job. Because one of the big things that's happening in both craniosacral therapy and intuitive healing is that there is a calming of the central nervous system. We are so dysregulated just on a normal daily basis because of all of the external factors and social media and all these things. Most of us feel some level of anxiety and dysregulation on a normal basis. And so these sessions in and of themselves will at the very least make you feel more relaxed. And then to your point, if you can allow yourself to get out of your head and just feel what's happening in your body, so much information can come to you. And I think that that's part of what I've set up in my space, is this container where when you come in, you feel safe enough to be able to get out of your head.
Yeah. And by like getting out of your head, I think you mean what we're normally focusing on as our issues are not our issues.
It's that analytical mind. I'm not in touch with my body. I just live up here instead of in my full self, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's really neat. So something I've been wanting to ask you for a long time, just because I find it super interesting. Is there an end goal for this type of work? Like I think I've had a couple of experiences, and this is going to sound really wild, where I've gone back to like my childbirth and I was cutting cords of like emotion. And I asked you if you had done the same thing and if you had experienced that. Is that kind of like the goal, to go back to birth? Because that's when you start to have input from your mother, input from the environment that starts to affect you?
That's a really good question. And I think that's a hard one to answer, because I think that the journey is different for everyone. And I think it depends on how open to it you are. So I am very respectful in observing that not everybody has the same philosophy as I do, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean that you can't have the work done. So, I have to be careful also about, like, if somebody's not open to it, I can't necessarily talk about some of the things that might come up, like getting all the way back into childbirth, or because not everybody believes that you can remember things from your own birth, or have, even though your tissue might remember, again, it's that analytical brain that, that can't possibly be true, that you can remember your own birth or feel things from your birth. So I don't necessarily delve into that with everyone. If you're open to it, absolutely, we'll explore whatever, right?
Yeah.
Including things like maybe there's a past life that's coming in and playing a role. Or maybe there's a soul piece, right, that we have to reconnect. But I don't broach that with everyone.
Yeah. Now, would your goal be to hopefully over time build trust with people so that they would be more open?
Absolutely. But that's something that I'm feeling out from session to session also. And, but I think the end goal is to, help people to have a more regulated central nervous system, and B, help them feel more connected to themselves and to other people. The reality is that we are all connected through source, right? And so that to me is important, and so many of us feel disconnected from that, and that connects us all. So I think if I can help somebody feel more in touch with their own body and feel more in touch with the earth and with source, then that's a great outcome.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, just the range of people that I've sent to you, and when they come back, like their experiences is so different. And even I have a friend who wasn't super open, and she's like, it was relaxing, but I almost fell asleep. And I saw her the next day. We were working out together, and I'm like, well, you know what? I see a change in your body. So you might not have been open, but the work is still done, and you are lighter. You are kicking ass today, and you have a level of energy that wasn't there. You're moving like you're almost a little bit of a different person, and I've seen that happen a couple of times. So it's really interesting. It's also neat that regardless of age or sex, that the clients that can be open and that are open just start to really, really change. And not all of these changes are physical immediately. I mean, I think that's what everyone wants. Like, okay, I'm going to start healing. I'm going to get ripped. I'm going to recover. But they always come. And I think that's the biggest piece and takeaway. I mean, if I could sell it, is that you will heal better. You will feel more recovered. You will sleep better if you can start to work on this healing. So in another question for you, do you feel like we all as individuals are verbal healers, that we are all need that time to process like quietly, that maybe we should go through the range of all the different types of healing?
Another great question. I think that at some point in time, there may be something that is going to come to me that I feel pulled or pushed to ask. And if I can get the person to get out of their head and into their body, oftentimes I will get some really great, not just information, but some really great healing happen in that moment. And this is part of that building of trust, right? So I don't always do that in the first session. Sometimes we just do a quiet session the first time out because that's what the person is open to, and that's okay. And then as we continue to work, I may get more of those kinds of questions that come to me where I feel like I'm not doing my job if I don't answer or ask these questions and get some answers. And the reality is that what a person on the table chooses to share with me is up to them. They don't have to have a verbal answer to me for the work to happen. Maybe they're just thinking it. Maybe they're asking the questions in their head. You know, I've posed the question and they start to ask their body questions and they're doing it in their head, and I don't ever have to be aware of that conversation. If they're able to tap in and get the information, then I've set up the situation in such a way that it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one of the other things that's really important to point out here is that it sounds like I'm doing a whole lot in these sessions, and the reality is that I'm having things come to me. I have this sense, and I'm picking up on things, energy or emotions or something that's happening, that's changing in the tissue. The reality is that the work is actually being done by the person on the table, right? And so for me, this is about facilitation as opposed to anything else. So when I say I've done my job, that means that I've created a container and provided the resources, right, by just being there as a safe space or as a listening ear for you to be able to do what you need to do while you're in my office.
I like that because I think that'll really resonate with a lot of people who train here. What most people who are working out and training here are people who are taking their health, fitness, and life kind of into their own hands, you know. So they want to feel like they have some real control over what's going on. And I really agree with what you're saying. What you're doing is you're holding a space for people to work through some things, regulate their body, which I think really, if people are trying to like look at this and be like, make sense of it, that's what we that's what we do with our classes and stuff. You know, we give some direction and things like that, but you know, people are kind of choosing their own adventure and how to express that, in whatever way that they want. They're using the environment and things where obviously, like, a lot of this stuff it's out there, it's free, you could do it on your own. But yeah, I really like that. And then Kate, I wanted to kind of ask, it'll probably ping pong back to you, with your clients and just with people you see in general, where at some point do you see where it's like, okay, you need a service like Jessica or something is like, we're not, something's off with you. Like we're not getting where we, what we want.
No,
what do you normally kind of see there?
I would say it's hard. You never just, I feel like no one's typical anymore, which I like. Every person's so different. But it usually will take a little bit for someone just to even open up to me enough to know that there's more going on. But I really observe people. That's why I feel like I'm like watching someone in their natural environment, like to begin with, like, how do you eat? How do you work out? What's your life like? And then I just kind of watch them and watch their behavior and really start to see what matters to them in life and if their life is aligning with their values. And I feel like that's where I really start to notice some discourse. If there's like, hey, my behavior is not aligning with what I want out of life, or my relationships, or there's just some discourse there, and I don't think they're maybe aware of it. And it seems like we're almost just kind of like battling, like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And they're like, well, this is what I like to do. And I'm like, well, this is how you want to change. So there's something more emotional going on. But here, I guess probably in the last couple of months, there's been several clients. I guess they've been return clients, whether they had worked with a different nutrition coach in the past, whether they were my old client, that right off the bat, I'm like, hey, I want you to see Jessica, because there's enough going on here. Their life is very stressful, or they have a lot of the health ailments and not healing is really coming up. With a lot of return clients. And generally it's because they have been doing CrossFit for a period of time. They're older, but they've had these injuries or just some wild health issues that don't seem to fit their lifestyle.
That's kind of where I was just in with her, where
you're, and then that's a really good.
I've been sick for like 2.5 months on and off,
And I mean, if you don't mind talking about yourself, you're a good point to bring up, because I mean, for the last, since your brother died, your health has not been. There was maybe a period where you're kind of on survival mode, like, okay, let's get the funeral planned. Okay, we're going on this trip. We're here. Then we see your parents are okay, and then it starts to hit and hit and hit, and it doesn't make sense except for you're going through something really, really hard emotionally, and then. In that circumstance, I always say people need supported. They need help. They need supported. And I'm not going through it at the same intensity as you, but still feel that, like, even just here in the wings where I feel like I need extra support and extra, because it's a whole family that's healing. And it's a horrible thing that's happened. And so it's, every client is different, but as soon as I notice that if there's discourse between what's happening, or it's almost like we're stopped by something. So it's an intuition for me as well. And I've started to lean on that much more. So my old clients that come back, they're like, okay, this is interesting. You've got all of these crystals laid out. What are you doing now? We're not counting macros. You don't have to hit 150 grams of protein. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, hey, you do want to get protein in. You want to focus on that. But like by this point, if you've worked with me 10 years ago and we were talking about every meal that you needed to have with protein, the truth is you don't need the same amount of protein every day. I mean, Dave stayed jacked for about 25 years straight, like not counting his macros. I mean, I think there's other ways to do it that are less stressful and less burnout, because anyone that I saw tracking macros when it's not giving a shit anymore. And they either like kind of come into like, I'm going to be more balanced and stay in pretty good shape, or they just fall off a cliff. And it's like all the old bodybuilders. Brandon will kind of joke around like, oh, I see all the ones that have retired, because it's really hard for them to stay moderate. Like they look very unhealthy in every way possible. And so I'm always trying to evolve. I'm always trying to find ways to evolve personally, and then how can I help other people with that? And we're all different. I think it's really neat how we're all different. And some people have just had a harder life. So when they come in and they've lost a lot of family members, or just had a horrible childhood, or they just have so much trauma, and I guess to that point, when it seems like they don't have enough energy to even care for themselves, I know we need to start there. Mm-hmm. And that's another one that's very common, where it's just like, it is just not, they don't have it in them to even care for themselves. They'll care for other people, but it's that lack of energy to care for themselves. That's self-love. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're all working towards, is how to love ourselves. It seems simple, but apparently it's hard in this human lifetime. Always. Apparently it's our biggest battle. I'm like, Jessica's like, what do you think that's about? And I'm like, about loving myself, of course. Yeah. And I'm like, here we are again.
It is a common thing. Yeah.
I cry and laugh a lot during our sessions.
For a lot of people. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense, though. I mean, anyone who, if you have a lot of, self-love and compassion for yourself, you're going to take better care of yourself. Yeah. You're going to exercise, brush and floss your teeth, eat properly.
Yeah. In cooking, I know this sounds silly. I've talked to you about this before, Brandon. There's something very healing about cooking for yourself and preparing your own food. In the willingness to do that, or an opposition to that, is very interesting to me, because it's always a huge red flag. If someone says, I don't care, man or woman, I don't like to cook for myself, I don't like to prepare food, I know there's something else deeper emotionally every time.
Well, and there's an energetic piece that goes into it too. When you prepare food, especially, they talk about like you can show love through cooking for other people. Yeah. The same thing happens for yourself. So if you're preparing food for yourself and you're like, I just hate this.
Yeah.
Imagine what energy you're putting into that food.
I think that's like on Ratatouille, like a Disney movie, right?
Could be, yeah.
But truly, I feel like it really is. Whether it's something you don't want to eat, and my old school. I have clients that I've been doing this for so long. I would write down on a piece of paper, this is what you're going to eat every day for like 6 weeks. And that's what I would do, like way back in the day before macros. You eat the same thing every day. And I remember, I don't care what it was I was eating, I hated all of it by the end. Like, and there's certain things you'll like or not like for meals. But yes, to enjoy your food, to prepare food for yourself, I feel that's really, really important. So, oftentimes with clients, that's like an assignment. Hey, I want you to prepare dinner for yourself 3 times this week, and then you can just take that dinner and make it for lunch. And I love the meal services, I do. But I can tell when I'm eating that, and just as a way to control calories, it's not the same as if I make my own food. Mm-hmm. And you exert some self-control on portions. So it's, I think for so many different reasons, I will send people to Jessica, but most of them are emotional. The not healing is one, but there's food is very emotional, so it comes up quick. Mm-hmm. And if that person can be open, it comes up pretty quick. And I had an older client. I never did get him to see you. And he's one of my favorite all-time clients, Todd Friedman. And he said to me once, he's like, Kate, food is not emotional. I don't feel anything. And I'm like, if you will be open, if you will really let yourself be open, you'll find that. And we kind of finally found that towards the end of his time with me. It was a really neat moment where, a guy in his 60s is being open to this idea that, hey, I have emotions around food. Mm-hmm. If you can be open to do it. And I used to say the same thing, like, hey, I just eat too much. I know what my problem is. I just like eating too much. Well, that's emotional. That's comfort. And that's okay. That's not horrible. But to know that about myself is a lot easier now than to just think that I've been given this bad hand and I'll gain twice as much weight as my friends. Now that I've really taken a step back, I eat twice as much as them. When we're out, I just eat faster, or that's just my nature, and to work with that. But it's really, I think this type of work has made me excited about helping people again. And that's what I really love about it. Like all this energetic work where, I've been in this field for 25 years. After about 10, I'm like, okay, same old, we're training another client. Eat your food. You're not eating your food right. You're not doing and then if you really start to look at each person, like they're a book, like you're just opening them up and what's their story. And I have found I don't really know my story. I know stories I've told myself about me, but coming back to me and like myself and opening up my own book and being like, well, hey, let's question everything you've ever told yourself from like the very beginning to now, it makes it more interesting. Mm-hmm. And when I feel that with myself, I think it's easier to feel that with everyone else. Like this is something you've told yourself, but now we're coming back to it's different. And Brandon, you've always said, you've heard me be open about like my struggles with overeating or binging. You're like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get why people would do that. And I'm like, I do. That's what I do when I get upset. It's my first default. And then with the loss of your brother, that's something you worked through in your grief group where you're like, hey, I guess I am leaning on food a little bit more than I realized, or that's a way that I'm coping, where you start to, if you really can open yourself, you start to see that we're all very similar. It's just being honest with yourself about how you act and how emotional you can be with everything.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes it's hard to, I didn't maybe realize how much discipline I really just always had around that, just without even thinking. It had gotten so ingrained over 15 years, oh, it's just what I do. And then when those guardrails start to just kind of come off at some point, then I was able to recognize that. I'm like, oh, I am wanting to go to this, at night. And this is like, I'm starting to soften up here, and I'm really antsy after dinner now, if I'm not eating something.
I know, I always see you sneaking back in the kitchen.
Yeah, I'm like, and that just wasn't something that I used to really do. And I recognized it and nipped it, but.
Well, and so often it's an emotional piece, right? And it's something that we can control. Mm-hmm. We have control over what we put into our mouth. And even though oftentimes it's actually something that's out of control, we think we're in control of it, right? And that's the reason oftentimes behind things like anorexia and bulimia, right, is that your life is so out of control that this gives you something that you think you're in control of. Yeah. And oftentimes if you've got emotional stuff going on, some sort of tragedy or trauma or whatever, food is the thing then that you put your focus on.
Yeah. And I think to a certain degree, I mean, right after he passed away, it's comfort. And I don't think it's wrong, where I'm preparing like comfort food or whatever. And I think there's a time and a place for that. Absolutely. And then for holidays or birthdays or whatever. But it is all very, very interesting. Before this gets away from us, there was something else I wanted to ask you about because I found it super interesting. You had gone through some recent training dealing with a fascia. Mm-hmm. In addiction. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of came back from this training, and you had told me, like, basically during this training you had discovered every person deals with some sort of addiction, and we can kind of figure out what it is with you. And so we did during our session, which is kind of funny. I came home and told Brady, I'm like, of course it's overdoing it. A general overdoing it. You're like, not really in particular with anything.
Yeah, it wasn't a shocker.
Yeah. She passed out. So I just found that really, really interesting in kind of working. Can you explain more about like the fascia and that theory?
Yeah, well, so I took this training. It was actually about concussions. And so in the class, the instructor was talking about how, so Dr. Upledger, who created a training program in craniosacral therapy, had done a lot of studies on addiction, people who had struggled with addiction, and was working with them basically like post-rehab or in rehab. And what he found is that for people who struggle with addiction, that addiction lives in the cells. There are remnants of the, I guess, energy, so to speak, of whatever substance they abused or whatever it was that actually is the cause of the addiction stayed in the cells. And so if he could go in and remove the addiction from the cells, those particular people didn't relapse. And so, when I have somebody on the table who, like, we're continuing to deal with some of the same things over and over again, same themes, then that, having had that training made me go, oh, maybe it's actually because we have an addiction pattern here. And so, I find that because we've been working together for so long, you're kind of open to trying all the new things.
I'm like, try it out on me, go ahead.
So I'm like, all right, well, let's just see, right? And so then that's what came up, and it was like, oh, yeah, right? It made total sense to both of us, where immediately you were like,
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so almost in that way, so that's like you kind of doing that work is kind of me transitioning. Like when I'm working with a client, you keep doing the same behaviors. I'm like, okay, here we are. It's a new week. We have the same goals. And this isn't a large population of them, but if you tend to have the same behavior patterns over and over, let's switch gears a little bit. So, and that makes sense. And I feel like, you know, all of us will probably tend to have similar problems that we work on, but I do find that, like, you know, I have the same sort of issues and I'm always working on them, but it felt super hard. And just even, I think we did one session on it and then kind of got derailed by some other issues since, but I did notice some change in that and just almost the way that I was thinking and was able to calm myself down in trigger moments, which I think is the hardest. We all have our own triggers, but it's like in those trigger moments, how can you calm down?
Yeah.
You know, and that's not being so reactionary has really, really helped me over the years. And I think that's a lot of our work. And a lot of my reaction, I think food is just so calming for me. And if I don't have that, if I'm like on a strict plan or diet, then I'll explode. And so the food would calm me down so I'm not like exploding. But if I don't have that, then it's really tough for me. So in those moments, at like feeling how emotional I get and asking myself what else is going on. Like this isn't about this. This isn't about this situation. That's silly. You know, that's not rational. So if it's not rational, it's emotional. And that's like some childhood stuff, you know. But I find that really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And so that fascia work that you do, is it the craniosacral work? Is that considered the same? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So the fascial work, it's really interesting to me. It's kind of where I've put the bulk of my emphasis now these days, because fascia is kind of the king of the body, right? Yeah. So you can go and I'm not saying anything about these other modalities as being ineffective, but like you can go and have chiropractic and have the same thing adjusted over and over again. You can go and have a massage and have the same problems over and over again. And it's not because they're ineffective. It's because the fascia itself needs to be released or decrease in tension, or, you know, something needs to change with the fascia. And so the craniosacral therapy is really great complementary to these other modalities because it works the fascia.
Yeah.
You get the fascia to change, and then the chiropractic adjustment will hold better, or a massage will be more effective.
Can you explain what fascia is, just for people? Because I feel like it's something that you're learning more about, and you'll share with me that we didn't even realize how involved it is in the inner work, in all of our body, in our organs or surrounding our organs, our joints, our muscle.
Yeah. So fascia is the connective tissue. So I like to use the example of like a chicken breast. You have a raw chicken breast, you see that white tissue that's on, and oftentimes people will cut that off. That is fascia. It is a connective tissue that is everywhere in the human body. It literally goes from your toes up to your head. And through the new research that has been done in the last several years, they have discovered that fascia is bone. It makes up the cell. It is inside of the cell. It goes all the way to the nucleus of the cell. So it is literally everywhere in the body. And there are scientists, for lack of a better term, that have done cadavers, right? And they've literally cut the fascia away from all of the other tissue, and it's one strand. They can keep it connected from, and you can see it like in a bodies exhibit. And so it is like in a muscle, for example, it is the layer that surrounds each muscle fiber. It then goes around each bundle of fibers. It goes around then the entire muscle. It is what makes the tendons that attach to the bones.
If you ever pulled like brisket apart, like it's like that. It's like a dense film that like it coats everything.
Literally everywhere. And so so somebody might come in and get on the table and be like, "Well, I don't know what you did." But fascia, because of the way that it responds, in a session, and I can literally feel change anywhere in the body just having my hands at the feet or on somebody's back.
I've experienced that, where you'll have your hands on my feet and I'll feel like something releasing in my neck.
Yeah.
And it's wild, but they're directly connected.
Yeah. And we have these lines of pull, and we have these postural lines and fascial lines that literally allow you to then affect change anywhere else in the body just because of that one place that you put your hands.
That's really neat. Mm-hmm. I know we ran out of time.
Yeah, I think we ran out of time. You got to go coach your group. But Jessica, thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
And what you do is so cool. And this could
Thank you.
be like a Joe Rogan style, like 3-hour one if we had
Yeah,
time.
I know.
No, we appreciate you coming on.
Thank
With
you
a live
for having me.
demonstration.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm up first.